And welcome back to another edition of Your Voice, Your Future. I'm your moderator, Armstrong Williams, on this Monday, March the 30th. And we welcome Sam Faddis back for the first couple of segments. You know, Iran, Sam, has drawn a clear red line. Any American boots on the ground will trigger direct and severe retaliation. And at the same time, our country continues to reposition naval assets, air defenses, and rotational troop deployments across the region, moves described publicly as defensive, yet unmistakably, Sam, strategic imposter. Now, both cannot point to peace. In the real battleground, the Strait of Hormuz, nearly a fifth of the world's oil flows through, and recent weeks have seen renewed threats, harassment of commercial vessels, and heightened naval vigilance. And this is no longer theoretical leverage, Sam. It is active pressure on the global economy, and the conflict, unfortunately, is widening. And to get a load of this, the Houthis have intensified their role, targeting shipping lanes and signaling alignment with Iran, broader regional posture. Their actions stretch the battlefield beyond a single flashpoint now, turning maritime corridors into what is becoming contested space. And then at the same time, indirect channels remain open. Regional intermediaries, include Gulf states, continue quiet efforts to prevent direct U.S.-Iran confrontation. Iran signals conditional openness to diplomacy, while Washington maintains this pressure without committing to ground engagement. But the problem here, Sam, there's a contradiction. Public language references restraint and negotiation, but the operational reality reflects deterrence through escalation. And the recent signals are both escalation and constraint. There's this increased U.S. naval and missile defense positioning in the Gulf, continued Israeli strikes, and stated intent to sustain pressure on Iran, Iranian-backed groups expanding pressure points without triggering full-scale war. You got this back-channel diplomacy still active, preventing immediate direct conflict. Troops are rotating. But what happens is here, the positions are hardening. Markets remain volatile, pricing risk in real time. And here's the bottom line. Not de-escalation, controlled escalation, not war, but preparation for its possibility. Iran is signaling readiness, and the United States applying this calibrated pressure. Listen, the battlefield, Sam, is no longer contained. It is networked. But here's the thing I want to say to you. When words suggest restraint, but systems move into place for conflict, what I say to people is trust the movement, not the messaging. Sam?
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I will hope to be proven wrong. I don't think we are standing on the cusp of seeing this thing wind down. I mean, you know, we're beating the hell out of the Iranians conventionally. Okay, that's a one-sided fight. They're not really responding by attacking our military. I mean, they do periodically, but they understand that they're not going to win that fight. So they're effectively holding a knife to the world's throat. They've closed the Straits of Hormuz to anybody who doesn't pay a toll. And they're threatening every 5 minutes that they're going to start taking out on a really big scale production, oil and gas production facilities in the Gulf, which means once you do that, I mean, they already took out part of the Goodman field. It's going to take 3 to 5 years and $20 billion to rebuild that. So once you start doing that, you're no longer talking about are the straits open or are the straits closed, because once you go down that road and you set the whole place on fire, there's nothing to move. And right now, I mean, it's a little hard to track exactly what is and is not going on with these negotiations. It is unclear to me that the Iranians actually want this to end right now. I mean, we're beating the hell out of them, but we've destroyed most of their military. But they remain, I mean, the center of gravity is the Straits of Hormuz and the question of does oil and gas come out of the Gulf? And right now they got a stranglehold on that. So I will hope we see a breakthrough, but I am not optimistic right now.
Why do you think they have such a stranglehold on the Strait of Hormuz?
Well, I mean, look, they can't sail out into the Indian Ocean and fight the United States Navy on the high seas. They don't have the capacity to do that. You got an oil tanker that's almost I mean, a mile long, slight exaggeration, a huge, slow moving object going through the straits, which are incredibly narrow. And it's not just how narrow the straits are, the shipping channel within the Straits of Hormuz is only a couple of miles wide. So you know exactly where they're going to be, and they're moving slowly, and they're right in front of you. And you don't have to use a high-tech weapon to hit that thing. I mean, they can make these drones they're using almost in a garage. The tech they use for that is, I mean, if you can work on a fiberglass boat and you mess with radio-controlled airplanes, basically you can build one of these drones. So they can build these things for almost nothing any place and strap some explosives to it. So there's not really any end to the supply of those or their capacity to fire those. And again, they're shooting at a target that's almost impossible to miss, right? You know, it's the old expression, broadside of a barn. I mean, that's what you're talking about. So you own one of those tankers and it's filled with oil, and what's the investment there between the ship and the oil? You're not, no commercial company is running the gauntlet, risking doing that. And even if you tried to do it, your insurance company won't pay if you get hit. So in effect, they don't have to hit more than a ship every few days or something in order to close the straits.
So the United States has removed thousands of troops, so many assets. What does a ground war look like being fought in the Strait of Hormuz? Because many of us cannot imagine it being fought in Iran.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the concept of putting troops on the ground in Iran is madness, to be blunt. I mean, first of all, if you're going to launch a full-scale invasion of Iran, you need the whole U.S. Army, and actually you need a bigger U.S. Army. It's a huge country, and it's a massive operation. So, and if you're talking about putting small numbers of guys ashore for limited objectives, then, I mean, okay, that's fewer men on the ground, but they're also just nothing but targets. And, we've got an entire Marine expeditionary unit there now, which is maybe 2,000 Marines. I mean, God bless the United States Marine Corps, but 2,000 Marines is nothing in the scope of the conflict you were talking about. So you put guys ashore, I think you're just, I think that's a very, very bad idea. I would not recommend that at all.
We just returned from Cape Town today, and one of the biggest and most intriguing stories was how many people were saying how our president humiliated MBS in Miami with his cabinet secretary, with the world leaders, with the financial community. And Trump says that he had to kiss his derriere, is what he said. And he just didn't stop there. But what's interesting, though, Sam, power is often revealed not in formal agreements, but in moments of public posture. And at that future investment initiative gathering in Miami, what should have probably reinforced the U.S.-Saudi alliance instead hinted at something deeper, tension maybe beneath the ceremony, and only you can help us understand this. Recent signals sort of reinforce this complexity. Saudi Arabia continues to deepen ties beyond Washington, expanding economic coordination with China, and maintaining dialogue with Iran following their 2023 normalization, and leveraging its role in global energy markets to assert independence. And at the same time, the United States remains deeply intertwined with Riyadh on security architecture, arms agreements, and regional stability, particularly as instability persists across the Middle East. Now, the narratives follow humiliation or theater, and I think the truth lies in between. This is not, I don't think, a rupture, but a recalibration. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman continues to signal a multi-aligned future, economic diversification, sovereign leverage, and reduced dependency on any single partner. Meanwhile, our president projects a return to transactional diplomacy, measured in strength, leverage, and clearly defined interests. And what appears personal sometimes is often strategic. And what seems like a slight is often a signal. And this complicating the picture further is that the ongoing tensions in the Gulf, including threats to shipping lanes near the Strait of Hormuz, Saudi recalibration on oil production decisions, affecting global markets, quiet but active U.S.-Saudi cooperation, regional security, even amid public ambiguity. So was this a humiliation, or was Donald Trump actually saying to the Saudi leader that we're not equals, we just have a strategic alliance?
Yeah, look, I think people make too much out of this concept of a rupture because of public humiliation kind of thing. I mean, our relations with the Saudis are not going to be determined by whether somebody had their feelings hurt and didn't feel like their ego was stroked. I mean, there are much bigger issues here. I mean, I think what you're touching on, Armstrong, is something really fundamental. I mean, Americans think about, Saudi or any other country, and they're our allies. And somehow or another, when they say that, it means like we're blood brothers, like we're best of friends. Our interests always align. We won't ever go our own way. And that's not the way foreign policy and national security works, right? I mean, everybody, if they're doing it right, is out for themselves. And yeah, I mean, MBS is going to do what he thinks is best for him and the Saudis, and he's going to calculate that all the time because he doesn't want to irritate us too much, and he needs us. But I mean, look, in the end, he's doing what he figures is best for him and the people he's looking out for. And I mean, right now, I think what the reality is, you got a lot of people in the Gulf in particular who are looking at this situation, and I think, to be blunt, they're not sure they're not sure that we know what we are doing. Like, we just started a really big fight in the middle of this really critical area. There's already been a lot of damage and a lot of economic fallout, and there could potentially be one hell of a lot more. And they're not quite sure we know, like, that we have a plan for where this is going beyond continuing to blow things up.
It's Your Voice, Your Future. Sam Faddis is our guest. I'm Armstrong Williams, and we'll be back. Sam, this is kind of, you got to help us with this one. The president's decision to allow Russian oil deliveries to Cuba introduces a very complex and unconventional dynamic. I mean, look, I know it's framed as humanitarian gesture. The move aims to ease the daily hardship of the Cuban people, where energy shortages have long translated into blackouts, this economic strain and diminished quality of life. But the layers run even deeper, Sam. Russia gains influence in the Western Hemisphere. Cuba gains short-term relief. The United States navigates space between pressure and pragmatism, but the contradiction. Sanctions seek isolation. Humanitarian realities demand relief. And so helping people should never be controversial, but who delivers that help and at what cost always matters. So the relief for Cuba is leverage for Russia, a geopolitical signal disguised as compassion. And so there's this new, it's just, explain this to us.
Well, I mean, I agree with you that there's a note of skepticism in your question, and I share your skepticism. I assume that the idea is here that we're trying to negotiate with the Cubans, and we're going to show them we're acting in good faith. And as you say, it's a humanitarian gesture. I don't mean this comment to be directed to the Cuban people, but the Cuban regime, these are some really very hard, nasty guys. People underestimate them. It's this island nation. Their military, their intelligence services, these guys are no joke. Their intel services run rings around CIA on many occasions over a number of decades. So, when you're dealing with those kind of guys, I don't think a humanitarian gesture will be interpreted by them as good faith and we should respond in kind. I think they're just going to take whatever they can from you. So, yeah, I think it is misguided, and I don't know who's providing that guidance, but I certainly would not have suggested it. I'm like, you got to hold the line. If you really intend to pressure these guys, then you just got to hold the line. That's the bottom line. They're not going to understand anything else other than resolve.
What about this rhetoric from Russia? They're considering helping Iran fight the United States.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, again, I'm no friend of Vladimir Putin's, but what would you expect from Putin and Moscow, right? We have been arming the Ukrainians and in this war between Ukraine and Russia for years now, and sending boatloads of money to the Ukrainians, and our intel services provide the targeting data that the Ukrainians use to take out targets in Russia proper. The Russians have lost one heck of a lot of guys, most of their main battle tanks. I mean, there have been attacks on all kinds of Russian cities. We were all about that. So, what's the expression about payback? I mean, this is their opportunity to make us feel some pain. So I would expect nothing less from them.
This is interesting. There's this new fractal line, Sam, that has emerged inside the Western alliance. Spain, a NATO ally, has denied U.S. military aircraft access to its airspace and bases for operations tied to this Iranian conflict. Spanish Defense Minister Margarita Robles made it explicit. He said from the beginning, Madrid drew a hard line, no participation, no facilitation. This is not symbolic, it is strategic. And our president continues to posture strength and maintain operational flexibility in the region. But Spain's decision signals something deeper: allied divergence on risk, escalation, and the cost of entanglement. The contradiction is an alliance built on unity, now navigating selective participation. Public commitments to NATO solidarity remain intact. And so the operational realities reveal hesitation and recalibration. And this is what the fog of war is like. What we're seeing is not, I don't think, a collapse of alliance, but a redefining of its limits. And not every ally will move at the same speed, and not every partner will accept the same risk. And I don't think it's not a break, but a boundary, not disloyalty, but divergence under pressure. So these alliances endure not by uniformity, but by honesty about where interests align and where they do not.
Yeah, look, I agree. I mean, this is back to my comment of a few minutes ago. I mean, we're allies. That doesn't mean we're blood brothers and all the time we will show up for each other in all circumstances. And that's not me. So, look, I think Spain ought to be thinking long and hard about making a decision about telling American aircraft they can't fly through their airspace in the middle of a war, because that's kind of a big deal. And we ought to remember that when we needed you to show up, whether you agree or not agree, you wouldn't. And what you're doing is, we're not talking about your guys on the ground. We're just talking about allowing our aircraft to transit your airspace. But I mean, let's think about NATO. NATO was created to stop the Russians from rolling into Paris, basically, at the height of the Cold War, when we were thinking, I'm not sure it'll take them more than 72 hours to overrun Western Europe. That was all about that. It was all about the Soviet Union. It was all about that immediate threat. Okay, and that world doesn't even exist anymore. So now, pretending that NATO, that was formed for that reason, now automatically has to support us in anything we decide to do anywhere in the world. I don't see where the logic is in that. That's not why the alliance was formed. By the same token, we ought to take the same look at it. So look, the same goes for us, man. We're not required to show up for you guys all of the time, anywhere. There's no guarantee. If it's good for you, it's good for us, and we will. I agree with you. It's not like NATO's going to collapse, but moving forward, we need to understand where we really are.
So let's talk about the elephant in the room and what their true agenda is, because they have no intentions of de-escalating. And I'm talking about Israel and Netanyahu. What is their true goal in this escalating war?
Well, I mean, I think their true goal is to make sure that Iran is not a threat to them anymore. And the reason, and I would just leave it at that. And the reason I say that is because they don't much care, I don't think, how they get to that end result. So, in other words, that end result does not mean Iran has to end up as a liberal democracy with freedom and justice for everybody and prosperity for its people. Doesn't mean that at all. I mean, if Iran is basically a wasteland and torn apart by violence and famine, and that means it can't threaten Israel, I think that's a completely acceptable result for Netanyahu and the folks supporting him. And it's one of the things I've said from the beginning of this conflict. You know, Trump always talks about a happy ending, meaning peace, prosperity, democracy for the people of Iran. He truly wants that. I'm not convinced at all that the Israelis really care whether it's that or just, as I said, they just burn the place to the ground. And you've already seen that with Trump saying we're not going to target this, or we're going to, take a break from bombing for a period of time, and then the next thing you read on the news is the Israelis have gone and hit a whole bunch of major targets in Iran when we were supposedly saying we're going to give you a break for a minute. The Israelis are doing their own thing.
You know, I found that interesting, though, that the private conversation between MBS, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, and Trump was released, and MBS advised Trump under no conditions to slow down his attacks. Don't back off. Don't take a holiday. Don't take a break. Keep ramping it up. Iran is a threat to everybody in this region.
Yeah, well, yes. But at the same time, the amount of skin in the game that the Saudis have in terms of what their military is doing is minimal. But I would also look at it from another perspective here. We started this thing, and this thing is escalating. And right now, the impact on oil production, gas production, and the world economy actually so far is minimal. And it's already bad, but like you ain't seen nothing yet. So, and I'm not convinced at this point, with all the punches the Iranians have taken and the leverage they still have, that they're actually in any mood to shut this down. So from MBS's perspective, he's probably looking at this thing, and what he's thinking is, don't you dare think about kicking up all this dust and causing all this trouble and basically setting the whole region on fire and now getting tired and walking away and leaving us holding the bag, right? Like, we're going to be next to these guys and they're still going to be controlling the Straits of Hormuz and droning our cities and doing all this, and you guys are going to say, on second thought, it's not a good idea, let's go home. Like, I can absolutely well imagine why he would say, no, you started this thing, you got to finish this thing now.
What are the Houthis signaling now by making these direct attacks on Israel? Will we see more of Iran's allies do the same?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you have seen other proxy groups do this. I mean, they're the proxy groups of various Shia militia in Iraq are marching around announcing that they're going to go to Iran and they're going to help them. I think you're going to see even more of that. I mean, the Houthis are being a little careful so far. You notice that so far they've only hit the Israelis, but I mean, they haven't started taking out tankers in the Red Sea. I don't think that's going to last very long. I think they will do that. I think we're going to cross that bridge too.
And in the meantime, where are we in this continued war between Russia and Ukraine?
Well, we're not getting any closer to a resolution because one of the pieces of the fallout from this conflict with Iran has been that we have removed sanctions on sales of Russian oil. So the centerpiece of our strategy was to take all the money Putin had away for running a war by not letting anybody buy Russian oil. And we'd actually made a lot of progress in cutting off those sales. But now we've had to roll that back because otherwise the world economy is going to crash if you don't let them buy Russian oil. So at this point, we're making it, we're hurting our chances of getting a settlement with Russia and Ukraine.
What haven't we discussed here tonight, Sam?
The biggest thing that worries me, Armstrong, is just that I don't think people yet understand the magnitude of what could happen economically to the world economy. Because it's not just closing the Straits of Hormuz. If Iran actually expands attacks on production facilities, oil and natural gas in the Gulf, like they did to Qatar, then you're talking about taking all of that gas and all of that oil off the market, not for weeks, for years, 5 years, more than 5 years. And God knows how many billions of dollars to rebuild it. And there are a lot of countries around, a lot of countries around the world whose economies will completely collapse when that happens. Especially in East Asia, who are more or less completely dependent upon imported oil and gas, and therefore they're going to go dark. And when they go dark, the world economy goes dark.
And China, as they look upon all this?
Well, and China's one of them, so that introduces that wild card. Are they able to sit on the sidelines and complain, or do you compel them to intervene because you're getting ready to kill their economy too?
And what will they do?
Well, they'll help the Iranians as the first step. But if you're really talking about crashing their economy, at some point you may have to think about the fact you're forcing them to militarily intervene.
So could it put a strain between China and Iran?
It could, or the Chinese could just decide to help the Iranians. Whichever way it goes, it's not what we need. And this is the problem with starting this conflict, right? The stress fractures, it's like shattering a piece of glass, and the fractures run in all directions. And the longer it goes on, the more you're going to see of that.
Sam Faddis, it's always a pleasure having your insights, your wisdom, and your experience on our platform. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you, sir.
When we come back, we're going to turn our attention to the U.S. and the global economy. I'm Armstrong Williams, your voice, your future. Steve Laffey, welcome back to the broadcast, and thank you so much for joining us. Steve, are we in a cycle correction or at the early stages of a deeper structural downturn?
Early stages of a deeper structural downturn, in my humble opinion. You don't really know with markets, but we've had a really good time from 2009 to 2020 where rates went down and the Fed kept interest rates at too low for too long. Rates have started to go up, and even when the Fed started cutting rates, interest rates started to go up. They've gone from 3.7 10-year bond to 4.3, let's say, today, even though the Fed has cut. Now you throw in probably a permanent risk factor in oil, which will keep it $20 a barrel over, which will affect everything. So higher rates unwind a lot of things for profits, the ability to borrow money. Take any industry, take an apartment complex. You borrow at 20 years with a 7-year amortization, and now the people who own lots of apartment complexes have to refinance at higher rates. It cuts their profits. What does it do? They pay people less. They have less people working for them. And this goes throughout the system. So we've had a long, good run. But I was around in 2000. I was around the year 2000, and then the spring of 2000 when Dell Computers said, hey, no one's buying computers. That was the peak of the NASDAQ market. It didn't come back to touch that peak for 12, 13 years. So we're sort of there because we cannot control how much money we're spending as a people, as a government, as a Federal Reserve. We're sort of there, Armstrong, where no one's willing to really solve the problem. And it'll just go on until we hit the panic bottom, wherever that may be. Who knows what will cause it? Who knows what will happen? The panic bottom of March 2009 was cured only when they allowed companies to stop marking their bonds to call, not to market, because they were broke, especially banks.
Well, so what are the markets mispricing right now? Risk, growth, or policy?
Probably all three. But the question about mispricing is that they don't all agree on the future of what's about to happen. There are some people still sticking to the AI story, where all of our economic growth basically came from last year, although in the fourth quarter it dropped dramatically. I'm just not one of those people, okay? I don't think that's enough. We don't have a lot of manufacturing jobs. In fact, we've lost manufacturing jobs. The tariffs have clearly, in the short run, hurt job growth in our country. So there's a lot of things like that. And our policy, I mean, if we had a policy to reduce our debt by changing the tax structure, if we had a policy to go back to the American public and structurally fix the $65 trillion Social Security problem, those are what the markets would look for to say, oh, they're fixing those problems. But when you hear commentator after commentator talk about how the PE ratio has come down to 20, I'm old enough to remember when it was 7, the price to earning ratio when I was a kid. So as rates go higher, price to earning ratios come down. I don't see how the Fed Reserve in any shape or form gets their act together, even with the new chairman coming on, because they just, I mean, we had the chairman last week, Mr. Powell, and we had the chairman, Mr. Powell, today, basically say he didn't know about a lot of things like what the future brings, whether rates will be higher, whether they should cut or raise rates. There's no confidence now in these people, and President helped the situation.
So is this new economy transitioning, Steve, into a new normal, or is this just a temporary dislocation?
It's a transition to a new normal. All big events like the financial collapse in 2008, or what happened with the Chinese virus they call COVID in America in 2020, change everything. It just takes a long time for people to either realize it, act upon it, or, I mean, for years, buying the dip has worked, whatever that phrase means for people, right? But we're moving to higher interest rates because the interest of the debt has gone from $300 billion a year, because we kept rates so low, and every year the Federal Reserve is losing money because they issued it so low, now they're issuing it at higher rates. Interest rates have to go higher. Unless someone can stop that problem, rates will go higher. That's the new normal. And when you have higher rates, listen, I started my career in 1987. I walked out in the summer of 1987 with a bunch of traders out of Harvard Business School going, if rates are going higher, why is the market going up? And everybody had an excuse. By November, it was much lower. So this could be a slow grind, much like 2001 basically was till 2009.
Well, is the U.S. economy still fundamentally strong, or is it being propped up by policy and momentum?
Fundamentally, we're ingenious people. We will come up with new inventions, and we'll be stronger than other economies because we have better systems than, say, even especially Europe, let's say, is another kind of continent. But is it being propped up? Of course it is. Look at what Scott Bessent does as our Secretary of Treasury to jawbone down interest rates. Look what the president says. Look what people do and say about their policies rather than fixing the problem. I mean, we're not fixing major problems domestically in our country. We are relying upon, we call it the K economy, very wealthy people who have great productivity, like the Tesla founder, to create the jobs. But we fundamentally aren't going through policies that help the middle class expand. And in fact, we've contracted the middle class on purpose, and they're angry. And we're seeing this split happen. The Iran war is really going to make this much more evident in November. But we're seeing this split happen among people. Remember, it was about people who didn't like Trump and don't like Trump, and they couldn't have Thanksgiving dinner together. It's worse than that today.
Well, then how sustainable then is consumer spending in the face of persistent inflation and debt levels?
It's not. In our country, the gross domestic product is the consumption plus C plus I plus G plus exports minus imports. And the C in our country, the consumption, is 70%. when, and I believe when, not if, that drops precipitously, and it's starting to now, whether it's cruise lines, people cancellations, all the things that would happen as oil gets more expensive, that causes a recession. But here's the problem, Armstrong. Our economy is on the precipice where even the Treasury Secretary, the President, the head of the Federal Reserve Board, they know we can't have a real recession, which used to cleanse everything. They can't have it because the debt to GDP goes so high that interest rates will go even higher and we'll have even further problems because the ultimate problem is too much debt.
You know, it's interesting because it doesn't seem as though we're understanding the consequences of long-term government deficits.
You and I understand it. Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, understands it. People will simply not speak about it because they're losing an election, and they're going to lose anyway, the Republicans, it looks like this fall, but they're afraid because they want power, even though they know the right thing to do. The things I've said for 20 years, the things I said when I ran for president are obvious, but no one else will really say them.
So let me ask you, a hypothetical. So what breaks first? The labor market, the credit markets, or the business sector?
I don't think this is one where one just breaks. We have this problem with private credit because it's called, by the way, private credit. No one knows how big the problem is. We do know that people are trying to exit private credit and they can't get out, and there'll be much more of this coming. We do know that there's $5 trillion of just investment grade bonds out there in America, $5 trillion, that many are going to get marked down to junk bonds, and then people will have to sell them. So a lot of this is now a slow grind rather than a big, what's going to happen tomorrow, stock market's down 25%, et cetera, et cetera. I would rather see that than the slow grind of bad policy about debt, bad elected leaders, the credit markets slowly, seizing up. Look at auto loans. The average American is behind in auto loans because cars are so expensive. Look what's happening with the inability to buy a new home. Guess what's happening to home builders? They're saying they're going to build less homes. Less homes, Armstrong, not more. We need more, but how many less people are they going to hire? So we have a labor problem, and that gets back to the real problem of the Federal Reserve. They have
before you mention the Federal Reserve, has the Federal Reserve done too much or not enough?
They did way too much from 2008 and saved Jamie Dimon and the banks. They saved their incomes, they saved the airlines, and they screwed the middle class. They did way too much for too long. Now, no matter what they do, they can't really do their job, and that gets to their double mandate. They can't possibly in stagflation like the 1970s both cure inflation down to at least 2%. It's running over 4%. They've had 5 straight years of failure. 5 straight years of failure, and they can't save the job losses that are coming because that's not really an interest rate problem in the short term, and they don't control long-term interest rates. That's the U.S. Treasury issuing too much debt, and our politicians from both parties okaying it as long as they can stay in power.
Wow.
It's bad.
Not a good prognosis. Let's just say that. Listen, Steve, thank you so much for joining us on Your Voice, Your Future. When we come back, Wafik El-Deury, director of Legorreta Cancer Center at Brown University, talks about something that I don't know if you're prepared to hear, but he's our guest when we return on Your Voice, Your Future. So, Dr. Wafik El-Deury, thank you so much for joining us, and welcome to Your Voice, Your Future. You know, you spent your career studying cancer at the highest level. What led you to even begin looking at COVID and its potential long-term effects? Doctor, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, but I can't see you. But
It's okay if you don't see me. We just want to hear you.
Yes, thank you. So I'm an academic oncologist, a physician scientist who has been involved with discovering a number of things about cancer and treatments for cancer. And when the COVID pandemic started, I became interested in whether there were strategies we could use to reduce the ability of the virus to infect human cells. And so we did a little bit of research on that initially back in 2020. And at the time, we discovered a class of drugs used to treat cancer that can reduce ACE2 expression. ACE2 is the protein on cells that the virus uses to infect the cell. We did some work to try and learn about the severity of the infection and things that could be measured in the blood based on our expertise with the innate immune system. We wondered right from the beginning whether the COVID virus could have any links to cancer. We know, and we've known for many decades, that a number of viruses can cause cancer, including human papillomavirus, hepatitis virus, Epstein-Barr virus, and others. And the way they do this is they target proteins in our cells that we use to keep cancer from developing. So one of these proteins is called P53, and I've been studying P53 since the early 1990s. And P53 is a gene that we all have that normally suppresses cancer in our body by preventing damage from all sorts of exposures to things that cause mutations and so on. It's also the most commonly mutated gene in human cancer. Some people inherit a mutated copy, and this can run in families. It's rare, fortunately, but those individuals carry a high risk of developing all kinds of common cancers at a younger age. And so we've known for a long time, we've learned a lot about cancer just from studying how viruses cause cancer. And one of the ways they do it is they produce proteins that suppress, block, or get rid of P53. And so I wondered right from the beginning whether the COVID virus might have any effects on P53 that we've studied for a long time. We've studied how it works.
What did you find alarming?
Well, we uncovered that if you overexpress the spike protein in human cells, this attenuates or reduces the ability of the P53 protein to turn on other genes that suppress cancer. And also, when we overexpress the spike protein from the COVID virus or the COVID vaccines, it appeared to make the tumor cells more resistant to different chemotherapeutic agents. This was unexpected and deserving of further study because, if you wanted to develop a good vaccine, you'd want to make sure you boost the body's immunity against the infection, but you want to limit any sort of collateral damage to how the host protects itself from developing cancer.
So, there's been a huge spike in cancer since the pandemic and COVID. What is it that you found, and what does it actually mean? The risk, the uncertainty, or something more concrete in the time that we have left to tell us what you found, and when you put this information forward, the kind of response you get from the medical and scientific community.
Yeah, so I will tell you, as far as population studies in the United States, we don't really have any good, reliable studies that have looked at long-term outcomes from the COVID mRNA vaccines. And most studies around the world have been limited to people who have gotten, at most 3 shots. You're not going to find any good papers on the population level around the world. Now, about 9 months ago, I was invited to serve on this advisory committee to look into COVID immunizations, and I was interested in links to cancer. And so I dug into this and found almost 70 publications that have reported over 300 cases of cancer around the world where cancer is developed close to where the shots or multiple shots were given, and they happened after these shots. And so for me, that was something that was really not expected. And this came at a time when a number of other things that these mRNA vaccines were doing were also unexpected in terms of how long they last in the body, their effects on our immune system, among other effects that they were found to have. So we put this out there to the advisory group. We published a review on this by January of this year. And the journal where it was published was under a cyber attack at the time, so people couldn't even read the paper that we published. And I personally have come under attack for a couple of years now with some of our earlier work linking effects of the spike protein to P53. Really, all we were saying is that we see some things that we wouldn't expect. We need to study them more. And I think that that's what we do in science. We make observations and generate ideas about what might be going on, and then we test these ideas. And that whole process is being shut down on social media through what appear to be concerted attacks on individuals. And it's not just the attacks, it's the consequences. They not only smear the reputation of individuals who are reporting on a certain narrative that they don't like, they also contact the government, they contact employers, they contact journals, and they essentially try to destroy the careers of individuals who are asking questions or trying to make sense out of things that are observed. And I think there's a problem with that. And I can tell you there's a lot of work that needs to be done that hasn't been done to look into these connections between the COVID mRNA vaccines and things they do in the body, including potentially promoting cancer. I believe that individuals, and I think this is widely known, we all have a different risk of disease in general, and that goes for cancer as well. So, not everybody who gets a vaccine has a high risk, but, 6 years into this, we really need to know a lot more than we do so that we can make decisions about what's best for us in our bodies. The whole idea of informed consent, I think, has been missing, and I think, that needs to be corrected.
I think you make an excellent point about who gets to really talk about this and this larger issue, who gets to question dominant medical narratives. Even if the risks are uncertain or still being studied, you strongly believe that the public deserves to hear all the credible concerns. And as a physician and scientist, you feel you have a responsibility to your peers, to your patients, and to the public. When you see something that doesn't sit right, we appreciate your bringing that to our attention. And I hope you have you back on the future to talk about this in a more deeper and longer forum. And I appreciate your writing this and thanking you so much for joining us. I wish we had more time, but that's the way it goes sometimes. But thank you for what you do, and thank you so much for joining us. And I want to thank our earlier guests for joining us as well. I'm Armstrong Williams. Thank you for watching. Make sure you follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Real Armstrong Williams. Your voice, your future matters.